God, it was so good.
I know, guys, you had something. I was like, wait, this is going well. All right, I'm going to go on mute for a second, and I'll keep you posted.
That's the first time this has happened. So that is, and so I've always, one time it was thunderstorming.
Sorry, now it's live.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll wait 10 seconds. Okay, hello everyone. We're going to try this. As you know, of course, I'm Dr. Swope, but let me introduce Dr. Seefeld with us, and we're lucky to have him. He's this year's chief reader, and we've heard from other chief readers, but as you can imagine, this year we're all going through a whole bunch of stuff, and the AP exam is not only changed, but had a short time to do it. So Dr. Seefeld has really given up a lot of his precious time to talk to us a little bit about maybe what we can expect, give us some hints, and hopefully maybe take our stress level down, because I know that many of the students are really nervous, but even some of the teachers are too, because we all care about this. Let me quickly tell you why we're lucky to have him. Dr. Seefeld's a professor at the University of Wisconsin in River Falls. And if you haven't been to college yet, that might not mean anything to you. But let me kind of go tell you this. He has twice been named the outstanding teacher in the College of Arts and Sciences. And so what does that mean? That does not mean he's a professor. That means he's someone who, for lack of a better word, gets his hands dirty. He talks to the students. He teaches students. And so that's important, because sometimes we think there's a divide between college and high school. And a lot of times the classes are very similar. So what we have here is someone who cares about learning, cares about high school students, and he's going to do his best to make sure the read, and that's what we call it, the AP reading. Everyone gets a fair shake on their FRQ responses. So with all of that said, let me say, well, hello, Dr. Seefeld. How are you?
Hey, thanks, Joe. I'm doing well. Thanks. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Okay, so what we want to, there are a ton of questions that a lot of students have and teachers have, but let's focus on what the students have. I think there is, because this is the unknown, no one really knows what to expect. So there probably are a bunch of questions about tech, computers and things like that. And I don't know that any of us really know that stuff yet. And then there are also, as you know, Nancy Fenton and I have had an email account, and we're getting hundreds of questions, really good questions. And one of the major themes is, how do I make sure, even if I'm doing everything right, how do I make sure I don't get caught plagiarism, and if they have their textbook or they use just stuff like that. So maybe if you can talk a little bit about that and maybe reassure us all.
Sure. Yeah, there's, I don't have to tell anybody that these are really difficult times, and they're really difficult times for all of us, students, teachers, chief readers, whatever, this year. And but before I get into those questions, I just want to say the admiration that I hold for the students that are still keeping things together and preparing for these AP exams, because obviously everybody's world is turned upside down, and it says a lot about a student who continues to study, continues to learn, continues to prepare, even with all the chaos around them and all the questions they have around them, to be able to persist and to continue on regardless of their outcome on an AP exam. It says a lot about them. Says a lot about you folks out there, that you're able to do this and hold it together and do the best you can. And that's all any of us can do. And that's something you should be able to hold on to the rest of your lives, that you're able to accomplish that through the toughest of times. So anyway, I just wanted to start with that I do have such a great admiration for people that are sticking with it as much as they are. And yeah, so lots of questions about the cheating issue, and there are different ways they will have of determining cheating, multitudes of ways, I know, but I think that it's not important to worry about that if you're not cheating. So I think if you are planning to try to cheat, that should be a big concern of yours. But if you're not planning to cheat, which most everyone isn't planning to cheat, then I don't think it's really anything to concern yourself about. As long as you're the person taking the exam and there's no one else helping you do it directly there while you're taking the exam, I don't think that's something that anyone really needs to worry about. So yeah, I wouldn't be concerned about that.
I think that makes sense. And if if you don't cheat, you're not going to have a problem with it.
Yeah.
Is really
Yeah.
is what we're trying to say.
Yes.
And
Yes.
don't try to outthink it. Is what we're basically trying to say. So
Yeah.
I would go with that. Let me ask you a quick question. The idea of a lot of students are worried about time.
Yeah.
And this question's come up quite a bit. What if a student can't finish? Can they still do well?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, they can still do well because, as you know, Joe, and I'm sure you probably mentioned over the days in preparing for the exam here, a person doesn't have to get every single point right on these free response questions in order to get passing grade on the AP exam. So those points aren't determined ahead of time, as you know, but it's certainly not, you're not going to have to get every point right in order to pass the AP exam. So I think that the time factor it's a real factor, as it is on every AP exam. And with the tech issues and things, if it's me taking the exam, I'd have a little concern about that as well, right? Just because it's a different format than you're usually used to taking them. But I think a good strategy here is when you're looking at the question, you see the question, and the good news is the questions shouldn't come as a surprise, the format of the questions. I know in psychology, I can just speak for psychology, but the questions they're going to see on the exam next week are going to be questions that are similar to the kinds of questions they've been practicing. So they're not going to see anything that's going to be like, what in the world is, how does this work? So it's going to be a similar kind of thing. So that's the first thing. So when you're looking at any of these essays, there are a certain number of points, a certain number of concepts that you're going to have to apply or whatever. And so look through those concepts, look for the ones that you know for sure to start with, write on those, get those in so that no matter what, you're going to get credit for the points that you knew ahead of time. Then go back and, you're going to have materials out that you can look at to help you, and then take time to look up some of those other things that you're not so sure about, and then write the answers to those points. But I think one of the things that could go wrong for people is if they think, well, if I'm allowed to look things up, then I'm going to look everything up to make sure I have everything exactly right, and they will run out of time. So I think you will run out of time, and then you're in danger of not getting credit for the points you probably knew anyway without looking anything up. So that would be my strategy for that. And if you don't get done, you don't get done, but at least you're going to have the points in that you knew of ahead of time. And any points are better than 1 point is better than no points. 2 points is better than 1. And every point you get makes it more likely that you pass the exam. So.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
Gotcha. All right. Before I get on to going over the FRQ that the students did, hopefully they did yesterday, but we talked about yesterday. What can any last minute advice, study tips, either from personal care or just academic advice? What do you got for the kids?
Yeah. Well, I think that whatever you can do to relax or take a couple hours off before that exam is going to be not a bad idea. Just settle yourself down and go into that in the days ahead or this weekend or whatever, and keep practicing the practice questions that you have, so you're used to that format and used to doing that. And then again, take your time when you get the questions. Just take the time and do the best you can. That's all any of us can do right now, is do the best we can at the time. And you're going to get credit for the points. I think that one thing that's important to remember is that we're all their advocates. So no one at the reading all the teachers and professors that go to the AP reading are first and foremost advocates of the students. They want students to do well. The people that are involved in writing the test questions want students to do well. The College Board wants students to do well. So we're all in their corner, we're all pulling for them, and we're all proud of them regardless of the outcome on this particular exam. So just relax, do the best you can, and yeah, I think that will take care of itself. Things will take care of themselves.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. I know you've got a lot of work to do, and we'll be in touch by email a little bit later. But let me say thanks again and goodbye. Let me move on to taking care of the kids.
All right. Thanks, Joe. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Good luck.
Okay, I'm going to share let's do this, guys. Okay, so we are going to proceed to talk about yesterday's FRQ. Okay, we know the first one was concept application. Let me actually start. There we go. First one was concept application. You know the time limit, so we're not going to spend too much time on that. Okay, general considerations we have here. The idea is basically meaning. Show that you know what you're talking about. Okay, everything else will take care of itself. If you know what you're talking about, then show that through the definition and through the application. Spelling and grammatical mistakes do not necessarily reduce a score. I had a student who submitted a question to myself and Nancy's email account, and the student said, "What if we abbreviate? Would that be a good idea to save time?" And I said, "No, because the abbreviation, the meaning might come through. And if so, what if you spell acetylcholine wrong? As long as you're close, the reader will know what you're talking about." So don't worry too much about that. Concentrate on the meaning. Again, definitions are necessary, but not sufficient. Okay, so you want to show what you know and then apply it. If you can pull off the definition in the application, that's great, but don't stress yourself there. Okay, one more time. Within a point, you're not going to be penalized for misinformation. If you're telling me that the the frontal lobe is good for thinking and the sky is red, well, that's fine because it really doesn't contradict. I think you're going to be okay there. Correct application with incorrect definition is not considered a direct contradiction. So again, the application is the most important thing. Mrs. Fenton the other day and myself today, I'm going to give you a couple examples of how to score, but by no means are these the only way. It's important to know you have a lot of latitude. You have a lot of flexibility to answer the question how you want. So there's almost a little bit of creative thinking. You can kind of bend the question in your response to get there, and that's fine. Okay, that's fine. And then responses that simply parrot or repeat. If they say, well, what is the frontal lobe? And you say the frontal lobe is the frontal lobe, that's clearly not going to work out. And then one more time, it conveys, answer the question. Okay, ask what the question, answer what the question's asking. Okay, having said that, we talked about Michaela yesterday. Notice that we had an 8-point question. The important thing, when I said answer the question, every single thing here must either help or hinder. You don't have to use the word help or hinder, although it might help. Make it easy for the reader to give you points. That's what I tell my own students. Make it easy for the reader to give points. This is not a demonstration of your writing ability. We don't need prose. We want you to answer the question. Okay, so when we look at serial position effect, the application must include reference to a list or series to be called, retrieved, or remembered. Responses can be included, so references to the idea that items she studied in the middle of the list. So what I'm basically saying is, look here. If you were to say here, responses can include reference to the idea that items she studied in the middle of the list might not be easily recalled, and that would be hindering her. So you can answer, while most of you probably said first part of the list or last part of the list, you could do the middle part of the list as long as you say it hindered her. Let's look at a couple other examples. If the test asked about the last few things in the list she studied, then she would do well. That makes sense. And that would be the recency effect. You wouldn't have to include recency effect or primacy effect in my example. Okay. And remember, I wrote this essay question, but this FRQ. So my rubric, it matches this. If the test has questions that asked about material from the middle of the series of things she studied, she would not do well on the question. So one more time, you have a help and you have a hinder, but you're your own mind, you're your own creative person. You can answer this almost any way as long as you demonstrate your understanding. Okay, availability heuristic. Students must demonstrate that easily recalled problem-solving strategies or solutions that easily come to mind can help or hinder her attempts to do well on the test. So let's look at the first one. Michaela might not do well on her upcoming exam if she used the strategy that easily pops into her mind. Okay. And what that application, you said A, it hinders, and B, you defined, you showed that you know what availability heuristic is. Michaela would do well on the exam if the study technique that she usually uses allowed her to encode the information easily. And one way to look at the availability heuristic is it's oftentimes the solution, that the problem solving strategy that you most often use or most easily pops into mind, or something that you're familiar with because you use it a lot. Negative reinforcement. Okay, this one might be a little tricky. Some folks struggle with this. The application must include reference to the idea that something unpleasant was removed after appropriate behavior was performed, or that something unpleasant, such as stress, was not removed and that did not help her study. So Michaela's feeling of dread was reduced after she studied for an hour, and let's look at the second part, should be on there, and I caught myself here. Michaela's feeling of dread was reduced after she studied for an hour, and that helped her do well on the exam. Okay. Or Michaela might not do well on the exam if her efforts at study did not remove something unpleasant, such as worry. Okay, so there's your help and or your hinder idea. Okay. The application must show that external motivation, such as money or other people's approval, would reduce her desire to do what she enjoys. Remember, the over-justification effect's a tricky one. If you like something, whether you like your hobby and your hobby's painting, and someone says, "Hey, I love your painting. Here's $5," and you say, "That's great. That's wonderful." Now they say to you, "I'm going to give you $50 more, and I want you to do 10 more paintings." Well, all of the sudden, all of the joy you have is reduced to only $5 worth, and it devalues what you were going to do anyway. So you want to convey that. If her parents paid her for every hour of studying, she would lose the feeling of fulfillment she gets and thus would not study as hard. Okay, that would hinder, of course. Michaela might do well on the exam if she did not let external rewards distract her from her natural intrinsic motivation. So many of you who are studying, this kind of directly applies to you. You've got an exam coming up in 2 weeks, and you want to do well for your own reasons. You want to do well because you want to do well. And yes, of course, maybe there's the 5 and things like that, but you're focusing on your efforts, okay, and not getting an M&M or a Cheerio or a lollipop for every hour you study. Prefrontal cortex. The application should reference that the prefrontal cortex is the seat of higher level cognitive functions. It's the planning, it's the judgment, okay? So Michaela's prefrontal cortex would help her plan how she's going to study. And then, make sure, even though I have planned how she's going to study, make sure you say, and that would help her do well on the exam. I don't know if you remember back in 4th grade or 3rd grade where you had to rewrite the sentence starter. That might help the reader find your point in there to make their job easy to give you a point. If Michaela's prefrontal cortex was inhibited by strong emotion, she might not be able to dwell on the test because she could not plan well. And notice, plan well is the key word that we have in this application, because that's what the prefrontal cortex does. It's involved in planning. Okay. Parasympathetic nervous system, and I've given this mnemonic before. If it helps you, sympathetic is an S, and it starts with S. So does stress. Parasympathetic or sympathetic stress. Para has the R in it. That's the relax function. Okay. So the application should reference that the parasympathetic response is related to relaxation, digestion, a lowered arousal, or similar process. Michaela was so nervous that her parasympathetic nervous system was inhibited, and then she could not relax enough to study. Okay. If Michaela was able to allow her parasympathetic nervous system to be activated, then she might be relaxed enough to do well on the test. And, again, you have latitude. You could bring in the idea of test anxiety or nervousness, or bring in, the Yerkes-Dodson law or something like that, that shows that you really know the relationship between parasympathetic is relaxation, and relaxation, she might be too relaxed. She might not be, you get the idea that you can kind of bend this how you need to do. Formal operations. The application must reference that her ability to think abstractly is gained in the formal operation stage. It's not going to hurt if you know this is a direct Piaget, a Piagetian concept after Jean Piaget's fourth step. That's totally fine. It's not necessary to bring in the theoretician, but it's not going to hurt. And you can write as much as you want if you have the time. Keep it focused, but if you want to throw something extra in, that's not going to hurt. Okay. Michaela was able to understand ideas such as the unconscious or irrational numbers because she could make mental representations of those concepts. And that's abstract thinking. And maybe in psychology, you could see where I put the word unconscious in there. Michaela might not do well on the exam if she hasn't transitioned into the formal operation stage and thus could not encode abstract concepts. Okay, so I think that's pretty, a plus and a minus there. Okay, fovea. The application must make reference to the function of the fovea, that it contains cones which allow for color vision or seeing fine detail, or that the fovea is where the image is focused. There's a lot of ways to answer this. And if you have a firm grasp of this, you don't have to worry about finding the precise one. Just find one of them that's correct. Find your one that's correct. Michaela's fovea allows her to read her textbook, which would help her study for the test. Okay, helps make sense. Michaela, and that one's, to be honest, a little weak because it doesn't talk about fine detail, but fovea, that one might score depending on some analysis there. Michaela might not do well if she tried to read with her peripheral vision because the image of the book would not fall upon the fovea and she cannot perceive fine details. That application clearly scores. It talks about where the fovea is, and it talks about the function, it talks about fine details, and I think that one's going to work. So I'm hoping that when you first saw this question yesterday, you didn't see any surprises. You knew most of the vocabulary. And let me tell you this, as a longtime reader, it's very rare that a student gets all of the points on all of the questions. Okay. You can still get a 5 if you miss 1 or 2. It's very likely. So deep breath, you're going to do fine. Okay. Sample question 2 for research methods. Remember, you had the time limit. But this time we only had 6 of these, so we have less time, less things. High school psychology teacher believes that attention in class is related to caffeine levels. She plans to do an experiment to investigate her belief. Please explain how the following terms might apply to her upcoming experiment. Okay. Independent variable, students must apply the definition in a way that shows that caffeine level in the body is the independent variable. Okay, caffeine being given to the student. So let's take a look at this. The teacher gives coffee to the students to see if they listen better. Now, with that score, it's at this point, I'm going to say no, because they're talking about coffee, but they're not talking about caffeine. But let's use this synonymously. So if we're going to use this synonymously, that coffee and caffeine are the same thing, then that would work, because the independent variable is the thing the researcher does, and the researcher gives the coffee. Okay. Students drink coffee to see if they pay attention. Again, that's the thing that's being done. The independent variable is the thing that's being done. Okay. Now we're on operational definition. Students must show that the dependent variable can be observed and measurable. In other words, sometimes I like to use, can it be countable? Attention can't be counted. Okay. So we're going to take this abstract idea of attention and turn it into a measurable behavior. So the dependent variable of attention could be operationalized, yes, that is a verb, operationalized as minutes of eye contact. Okay, and that would be, you can definitely count minutes of eye contact. Eye contact's a behavior. An operational definition could be whether the student was sitting up straight. So, if you're sitting up straight, then again, we know the problem's operational definition. But that's our point here, is that to debate that, it's to answer the question. Students must state that the independent variable will not have a significant effect on the dependent variable. We're talking about null hypothesis, by the way. Null hypothesis. This is a tricky one. And remember what I just said. It's very rare for a student to get all of the points. Okay, and sometimes teachers and or the college board is going to throw a question out there that's pretty tough. You're going to see some words like what the heck. You know what? That's okay. You can still get a 5. Remember, this is difficult. Okay, this is very difficult, and you're trying something difficult. So I don't want you to hold yourself to a position where you think I don't want you to beat yourself up if you don't know everything. I'm not going to say you're not supposed to, but again, it's very rare to get all of the points. So if the null hypothesis threw you, that's okay. That's okay. And wait do you see how I answer this and what I require? It's going to be pretty tough. Students must state that the independent variable will not have, here's the word, significant effect on the dependent variable. So my rubric is going to take it this a little bit higher. It's going to say you can't just predict no effect. You have to predict not a significant, and we have to measure it. We have to kind of state that in our application. The null hypothesis predicts that if a teacher gives caffeine to her students, then they will not pay significantly more attention. Okay, so my rubric here for this question is going to want this word. Now, if you didn't have that and you really understand the concept, okay, that's going to happen. It's possible you're not going to get all of the 6 or 8 points. I'm sorry, this one blocks. Let me that was supposed to appear. The null hypothesis, and I just think that was a fantastic bumper sticker, support the null hypothesis. The research nerd in me really said that's really kind of funny. Okay, so the null hypothesis predicts that an increase in attention cannot be attributed to caffeine because there are confounding variables. Thus, any change does not rise to the level of significance, which we know is 95%. I know it's blocked by the picture, but let me try to explain it. What the null hypothesis is saying is any change isn't significant because we don't know beyond a 95% kind of certainty. It could be caused by, well, teachers watching us. We better pay attention. It might not have anything to do with the caffeine. It might be the idea that coffee cup was warm, or maybe there was sugar in the coffee. There's a ton of confounding variables that brings in the idea of randomness. Randomness is going to be the opposite significance. The more randomness, the less significance. The more significance, the less randomness. And so that's how I wanted you to answer. I hope that's clear on that. Okay. Next question we have, ethical considerations. And remember, I said you have a lot of flexibility. I use the word latitude here. You can answer this a lot of different ways because there are a lot of ethical considerations. There is a little bit of creative writing here. I want you to relax, okay, and let your thoughts flow through and answer the question. Students who are taking the AP exam on May, it's like what I just said, students who are taking the AP on May 19th have latitude to offer any appropriate ethical consideration. In this question, there's not just one right answer. So informed consent, that is an ethical consideration. So let's look at how we can answer it. Okay. And one of them is you need to be able to, because the study involved minors, the teacher would need to obtain informed consent from parents of the teens to have them have caffeine to be ethical. Okay, a random high school teacher can't just start giving out, and believe it or not, caffeine's a psychoactive drug. We all think it's kind of harmless, but you know what I'm saying. You can't just hand that out. You need to have informed consent. Ethically, teachers must provide participants with general information about the nature of the study. So if you're going to invite people to be in the study, you have to give them some information. That's supporting the idea of informed consent. So I hope you got, if you went for informed consent, I hope these two worked for you. Remember that participants can withdraw at any time. So maybe here's one way to answer this ethical consideration. An ethical requirement is that students are informed they can stop taking part in the study at any time. If you wrote something like that students have, or participants, or in this case, who were students, had the right to stop at any time, then you would get the point. Okay. So the next ethical consideration is going to be confidentiality. And that, if you know the word, that one's going to be a pretty easy one. Remember that some of them might be super easy. I remember, I've been a reader for a long time. Some points almost everyone gets, and some points almost nobody gets. And if you didn't get the significance one, that's fine. Maybe you get the confidentiality, the ethical consideration one. Any information collected from the students must be kept confidential. That's a pretty easy one right there. Debriefing. It would be unethical if students were not debriefed or fully informed or told about the study, especially if they were deceived or if they were in a single blind study, because we know a single blind study by definition has some kind of withholding or definition. So debriefing would be a way for you to answer this. Okay. And then the next one we have is protection from harm. This is another one with ethical considerations, and the next one would be confounding variables. You have a wide latitude to pick one and go with it. Protection from harm. The teacher must protect participants, her students, from physical and emotional harm, such as feeling sick from caffeine or embarrassed from not paying attention. Okay, so the teacher has, a lot of researchers can't just focus on their results. If you have people who are volunteering and trusting you, you got to take care of them, even if it means stopping your study. Okay, and then when we're looking at confounding variables, it's similar to the same thing. Students who are taking the AP exam on May 19th, which is, I think, pretty much everyone watching this, have latitude, have flexibility to offer any appropriate confounding variable. In this situation, there are quite a few of them. Tolerance of caffeine. Maybe some people drink a lot of caffeine and some people don't, and she's treating all students the same. Placebo effect, Hawthorne effect, quality of sleep the night before. There's a lot of things that, as this study, the teacher giving caffeine to her students, there's a lot of things that could affect it, the dependent variable, aside from caffeine. And that's what a dependent variable is. What other things are affecting the dependent variable? A confounding variable might be that some students might have already had a lot of caffeine earlier and more of it made them sick, so they could not pay attention. So, that's something that I wonder if anyone wrote that way. I just came up with that one as an oddball one. But again, there's a lot of confounding variables. And as long as you demonstrate that a confounding variable is going to affect the dependent variable, I think you're going to be okay. A confounding variable might be that the coffee was a distraction in class and thus the students didn't pay attention. Okay, and that makes sense. If you're sitting at your desk and someone gives you a cup of coffee, are you going to start doodling on it? Or are you going to start tearing apart we're going to fidget a little bit. Maybe that would be a distraction too. Okay, skewed distribution. This one might be one of the ones that was difficult to get. So one more time, remember what Dr. Seefeld said. Even if you don't get one or two, it's of the points on an FRQ, it's still possible to get a 5. Okay, it's still possible. These are designed to be very difficult. So skewed distribution through you a little bit. That's okay. Students must explain that a data set is related to the scenario. That's the important thing. You can't just explain or define it. You have to apply it to the scenario. Has an extreme score or outlier. Students must also explain that the outlier must affect the mean. So we really have two things we got to do. We got to define what it is. Okay, it's an extreme score, and that it affects the mean, not the mode and not the median. Okay. If coffee increases attention for most of the students a little bit, but caused another student to become distracted and disrupted, his extreme behavior might distort the average increase of the class. So if 10 people, hey, you know what, it got them to pay attention a little bit more, but one student just went off the walls running around. If you were to look at the average number of disruptive behaviors, his number of disruptive behaviors are going to outweigh theirs, and that would be a skewed idea. And I'll show you a picture of that on the next slide. If coffee proved to be a distraction for most students, but one student gave the full attention, her extreme behavior might pull the mean attention score disproportionately upward. Okay, so let's maybe a picture is going to help us out with this. If most people on a test do badly, okay, but you have one or two that do really well, then the teacher is going to say, well, my test was fair. Some student did well, and I'm not going to discuss the validity of every teacher's test, but it gives you the idea that one extreme score, okay, could really affect the mean. Look, the mean and median and mode in a symmetrical curve, in a bell curve. This is important for you to know. Mean, median, mode in a bell curve are very similar. Okay, in a skewed distribution, the mean is really affected by this really far out there outlier. It's like this outlier way up here pulls the mean away from the median, okay, in a mode. So that's a skewed distribution. It might be worth your time to go review it. You can be skewed positively or negatively. Okay, couple study tips, okay? Let's start over here. what I'm going to suggest you do, and I've gotten a lot of emails, Mrs. Fenton has got a lot of emails. How do we study? What's the best way? There is no magic way. We don't know how the mind works, and this is the domain of cognitive psychologists. But let me tell you some hints that I think are going to work. What I think you should do is have medium length blocks, maybe 20 minutes at a time. Do study for 20 minutes. During that time, no phone, no music. Okay. After that time, reward yourself with the phone check. See what's going on, what happened in the world in 20 minutes you were actually focusing. Reward yourself, like I said before, with one M&M or one Cheerio. Maybe you can earn more later. Honestly, music, if you're listening to your favorite song, you're going to divide your attention. We know you cannot concentrate on two things at once. So don't play your favorite song. The only thing you can probably do is maybe do some white noise to block out the distraction to your family. That would be okay, because if you're listening to music, you can't listen, you can't concentrate on two things at once. You think you can, but it's called task switching. Trust me. Also, where do you study? Is it going to be the same place in the same time in the same mood you're going to do your exam? I don't know if it really matters too much where you're going to study and those kind of things, but I want you to check your mood. Okay. Before you study, 3 deep breaths. Before you go and do the AP exam, 3 deep breaths. Mrs. Fenton and I, we will admit to you all that before we started the first couple of days, we were terrified of doing this because there were thousands of people watching. 3 deep breaths. Okay. It's really going to help you out. And as Dr. Seefeld said, you know what? For a couple hours before you do the AP exam, don't do anything. Go out for a run. Okay. Literally just let your brain rest. Okay. I don't think you should be studying the minute before. Don't do that. As far as your physical self, like I just said, take care of yourself. Sleep is important. It's critically important just as much as exercise is. And then I don't know why this is added, but I talked about medium blocks of times. Okay. A lot of people say, how do I study? What's the best way? I don't have a magic answer. I think I'm going to break it down into 3 steps. The first step is a passive understanding. And I think many of us get fooled into thinking we know it more. You know, we're scrolling through the textbook or we have flashcards. We look at a flashcard. Oh, I recognize that word. I know what it is. That's the first and lowest level, maybe a passive understanding. You see it, you recognize it, you're familiar with it. That's necessary, but not enough. So then the next step, after you have, many of you probably have vocabulary lists and hundreds of words. The next step, ready? Can you explain it? Can you explain it in words that are not out of the textbook or out of Google or things like this? Can you explain it to your parents, brother, sister? I don't care if you explain it to your dog. And I think a good way to study is to self-talk, talk yourself through a problem. So that's going to be good enough for many things. Let's go a little bit more. Let's really nail this thing, okay? Third step is, can you make connections? Can you make connections between parasympathetic or sympathetic response and your amygdala? Okay, can you make connections between your hypothalamus and your adrenal glands? And if you can start to make connections between words, then you truly know it. So I think that's kind of my advice for the next couple of days, next weeks. Okay, questions? We got a couple of them. We're going fast. Jillian from Taiwan asks, how can I distinguish if what I was written does not address the prompt? Well, I don't know. I think a lot of us are overthinking it. We're really, really nervous. So I want you to trust yourself. Go back to basics. At this point, many of you have a huge wealth of knowledge in psychology. Many of you are already prepared, even if you didn't study anything anymore. Okay. So all you're going to do is, what I want you to do is, when you're writing your response, if there's a name in the response, if it's Michaela or Sophia, use that. Okay, that's what I would do. Use that name in the prompt, in your response. Ocean from Scottsdale, what is reciprocal determinism? Reciprocal simply means to give back and forth. To reciprocate means to return favors. It's a relationship between environment, behavior, and cognition. If you think a certain way, then your behavior is going to change. And if your behavior changes, then it's going to change the environment. And if the environment changes, then guess what? You're going to interpret that new environment change. So it's a relationship. It's a feedback loop between cognition, behavior, and the environment. Zainab from Willowbrook, in a data question, must we always mention that correlation doesn't lead to causation? No, not necessarily. It can't hurt. Remember, you've got a balance between you're pressed for time, okay, and the idea that you can't really write too much. So if you want to go ahead and add some extra stuff just to be sure, go for it. It's not going to hurt, okay? And at the risk of having typos, they're not going to be typed, they're not going to be counted against you. So if time allows, more is better. You don't feel like you have to, but more is better. Okay, Ermi from Scotch Plains, New York, must we include keywords in the application? And no, not necessarily. Okay, it doesn't hurt. Mrs. Fenton used keywords in many of her applications and demonstrations. I, as Ermi said, sometimes don't or often didn't. But again, apply, give a baseline of your definition and then demonstrate through your application. Keywords are not going to hurt. Synonyms, and other people say, must we do synonyms? They're not going to hurt. Show what you know. This is your time to show off a little bit. Demonstrate to the reader that you really know. It's not an accident that you know what you're talking about. Okay. And then Annie from Evan Hardy Collegiate. What is the difference between context effects and context dependent memory? And I'll tell you, what we're going to do with that is actually, I'm going to postpone that. And I think that maybe Dr. Loftus tomorrow is going to answer that one. Okay. Pets. I don't know if you recognize yours. One of these things is not like the other. And I respect the fact that one of the students said, I don't have a pet, but here, so I think that was kind of cool. So keep them coming, guys. We'll have some time to show your pets tomorrow. Okay. No tigers. If you know what I'm talking about and you're watching Netflix series, don't appreciate that. We have, we're running out of time. And I think at this point, you've seen these. Remember, you can copy and paste from Google Docs or Word. Not that I'm, of course, endorsing any software. Okay, copy and paste that. You can just write it in Google Docs or Microsoft Word, save it, and then upload it. You know that. You can handwrite it and then take a picture of it. Obviously, you have your flash on. Use dark ink, white background to make it easy for your picture to come through. Just kind of common sense things. Remember to have Grammarly disabled if you're writing. We know that by now. Okay, we know about the demo. Go here. And to practice, use the word practice. And this is going to help you kind of just get familiar again. You want to warm up. You don't want to go into this thing cold, having absolutely no practice whatsoever. Okay. We've talked about the exam demo quite a bit. We talked about pasting responses. We know about that. Okay. Time limit. Other links, might be an important thing for you to take a screenshot of. This has been posted, emailed out to you. I encourage you to check your AP classroom, check your account, get all of your, get your codes, get everything you need. We got the checklist. By that list, please take a screenshot. You can hear the desperation of my voice. I just don't want someone to say, nah, I'll figure it out later. And then of course we have a video for these 5 things to do. Okay. Thanks for watching. We hope you'll join us again, which will be the last time tomorrow. We don't have a practice question. Maybe I should change this slide, and we will talk to you tomorrow, guys.